Kia ora koutou. I'm here with Jeremy Moyle, who's an archaeologist that specializes in built heritage. Jeremy, could you please tell us a little bit about considering archaeology in the built heritage environment? What makes analyzing built heritage different from a typical archaeological excavation that people might be more familiar with?
Well, arguably, it's not particularly different in that you're still sort of dealing with past material culture and you're going to be sort of peeling back the different layers involved with things to try and figure out what you're going to be dealing with. But I guess in terms of that sort of approach, it's fairly similar. But the thing that I like about it is it's because I don't have very much imagination, it's a lot easier for me to interpret because everything that you're dealing with in a building, you can be clear that it was done with a particular intention, whether it was conscious or subconscious, whereas a lot of the sort of in-ground context that you might be dealing with are perhaps more like incidental. There's something that was created by a process, but you've got to sort of read through another couple of layers to be able to get it. So that's why I really like sort of looking at all the different bits and pieces you might find around a building, because you have that baseline that you know someone did this for a reason, and why did they do that? Why did that happen? Was it like some practical thing, or was it some more sort of cultural sort of typical way of doing something that's just always done that way, and so that's why it happened? So yeah, something like that. That's how it sort of, yeah, so the main difference.
That's really interesting. There do seem to be some parallels there as well. And so our other question is, how do you trace a structure's past?
Well, a whole bunch of different ways. Again, in principle, it's fairly similar to what you might be doing on a quote unquote typical archaeological site, in that you've still got stratigraphy in some shape or form. So you'll have layers that will put on, say you're taking a wall apart or something, someone might have put on a new interior wall lining over the top of an old wall lining. So a really good example would be newer wallpaper over older wallpaper over older scrim, and then below that you might have some sort of early match lining like timber lining or something that was covered up in the 1950s because that went out of fashion. So that's really similar, but obviously you're just working in sort of 3 dimensions, or it's all around you rather than just sort of on a parallel sort of flat on the ground. But I think the big difference is that it's not always, I don't know, I mean, I guess this is similar to what you deal with in ground stuff as well, but you've got to try and identify things from what's not there as well as what's there. And so because these are working structures, and most of the time anyway, people will have come back and sort of done a renovation or something that's taken away a whole bunch of material that might once have been there. And so when that's the case, you're really looking for like more ephemeral things like nail holes or markings on the wall or something that might indicate something that was there once upon a time, but has since been taken away. And through that, then you can sort of start constructing what the space might have been like in the past, or what the layout was and how that's changed, and then you can start asking bigger questions about why that might have happened.
Oh, and that leads quite nicely into the what kind of analytical techniques do you use in assessing or describing and dating these structures?
Yeah, I guess there's sort of two different stages for it. So there's the first bit is the raw data part, and that's basically what I've been talking about so far. That's where you're going and using your archaeological techniques to collect the different bits of information that might be held within a building. And so that's stuff that you'll obviously be familiar with, like written notes and taking photographs, lots of photographs. I don't know how people did anything before digital cameras. It blows my mind. But also with building and drawings as well. But also with buildings, obviously you're working a lot more on a vertical plane. So lots of elevation drawings, lots of plan drawings just to identify sort of building layouts. But also you can start doing all sorts of funky things like 3D isometric drawings, which I think are really, really good for visualizing changing phases over time, like how the building looked in general and how that might have changed over time. because when you look at a plan drawing or an elevation drawing, sometimes you have to sort of pause for a moment to sort of wrap your head around exactly what you're looking at for a section drawing or something like that. And so, as well as the things that you might be used to as an archaeologist, where you're going out and sort of taking a tape measure and a disto and measuring things by hand, we're also starting to play around with a lot more fancy digital recording techniques. So my colleague Ben and Jamie up in Arrowtown really getting into 3D photogrammetry. So flying a drone around a house, you take a bunch of photos with it, and then you can turn those photos into a 3D model. And then from the 3D model, you can not only just use it as a raw file to present as the information, but you can also use it to construct ortho photos, so or ortho-rectified photos, so photos of elevations that have all their distortion taken from them. So it's a really quick way to get an elevation together, so you can sort of indicate certain bits that are significant on that elevation. And that's good in something like a consultancy, because you can do it really quickly. But there's still the downside that you can't, you lose the interpretive process that you have when you're actually drawing something by hand, or having to sort of figure out how this works rather than just taking a photograph. But the other thing as well is, just for presentations purposes, we've been using Blender, which is like a 3D modeling program, and that can sort of help make really glossy, good looking drawings that, again, they're perhaps not that purely raw data, they're more of an interpretive, or moving to the realms of interpretation here, and that it makes it very easy to see what's going on and present what you're dealing with. But beyond all that sort of that nitty-gritty recording stuff, I'm mainly interested myself in all the different interpretations that you can get from it. And this is where the idea of having that intention behind what you're dealing with becomes really useful, I think. And there's a lot of questions that you can pose to buildings about why they do look the way they do, or they are laid out the way they're laid out, or they are built the way that they're built, that can be explored, I think. So sort of, I don't know, dealing, or how things have changed over time, and who built it, and what they might say about their culture. I mean, these are obviously massive broad things, but I would like to see in New Zealand a lot more research into sort of some of the more, I guess, sort of a real anthropological approach to buildings, rather than just purely documentary stuff. So just even having good studies about certain building genres, like sort of rural farm buildings, and were farm buildings in one place the same as farm buildings in another place or not? And if so, why is that the case? Like, are you dealing with a fairly homogenous rural culture throughout New Zealand and the way that their farm buildings were constructed, or do you have local variation, and to what extent is that going on? And yeah, so essentially, I mean, I guess it just boils down to the fact that these are really big pieces of material culture, and there's a lot that you can learn about them, sort of approaching them through lenses like time and style and space within them and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's really fascinating, Jeremy. And that, I think you already have touched on this, but are there any common misconceptions that you might like to clarify?
Yeah, there was, I guess, like, a lot of people who come into archaeology have already formed their perception of what archaeology is, and because that's large, or to a large extent perhaps digging in the dirt, it means that buildings aren't necessarily the first thing that they think about. That's sort of the realm of architectural historians or something like that. I guess, and because of that, and also because it has previously been the realm of architectural historians, there's also been a lot of emphasis on that sort of that art history approach to buildings rather than anthropological approach. So sort of talking about the great artistry with which these sort of really massive high status buildings were built. And I think because of that, you're missing a lot of research that you get looking at sort of vernacular architecture, and sort of approaching them as material culture, as an archaeologist might study anything else, any other piece of material culture. And so I would really encourage people to start looking at research that's out there in other parts of the world, where people have sort of been engaging with buildings more over time. I did my master's in Canada, and in North America, there's a moderately large group of people involved with what's called vernacular architecture. And so that's like a subdiscipline of architectural history and anthropology and folklore and all these different bits and pieces, but they're all interested in everyday buildings and sort of taking an anthropological approach to them. And yeah, there's all this amazing research out there and lots of stuff that's sort of addressing buildings in the 1920s and 30s and sort of moving up to the more recent time periods normally deal with them. So yeah, basically, I guess what I'd like to say is that there's a lot of stuff that can be done there, and I think it's just New Zealand's just prime for a whole bunch of research projects looking at historic buildings.
Oh, excellent. Ngā mihi kia koe. Thank you so much, Jeremy.